All right, so let's go ahead and get into tonight's lecture. And I got to move the mouse.
Do you want to tell the people online why we're doing the lecture first?
Yes, so let me tell everyone online why we're doing the lecture first. Is because I have to export these after the lecture in order to upload them to YouTube, and then that's taking like an extra hour after class. And my wife would like to have me home on time, and so instead of getting home an hour late, I should only be 15 minutes late because it takes about 10-15 minutes to drive. So, anyways, we're having actually we have a couple of students out tonight, so just the four amigos in here now. So, anyways, but they'll watch the lecture later. Three amigos.
Three stooges and
three amigos. All right, so let's. So tonight's kind of this might be a little bit more exciting in a way. We only have I think 4 more class periods together. So we have 3 lecture times, and then we have a review catch-up week, which is right after Thanksgiving. So we've got the 2 lectures before Thanksgiving, 1 class period right after, which is. Actually, I think it's presentations on your discipleship relationships. Yeah, that's what that is. And kind of a review week for your final exam, which will be the following. So we only have 4 more get-togethers, 4 more recordings. So we're going to spend the next 3 weeks talking about church planting, specifically talking about the church planter. Okay. So tonight we're going to talk about calling. So what does it mean to be called into church planting? And so I want to share a few thoughts, and everything I'm sharing tonight is not original to me. It's from guys smarter than me who has put stuff together, and so I'm basically, with their permission, plagiarized. So it's not really plagiarism if you ask their permission. They said, yeah, use it however you want to. So anyways, but I want to talk about calling. So we're going to jump into our little 3 weeks here, diving into a little more practical church planting. Now, who can remember from like the first or second class period, I can't remember which, I think it was the first, we gave a definition, the short definition for church planting. What is it?
Disciple making resulting in churches.
Exactly. Disciple making that results in new churches. Yeah, right. That's J.D. Payne's short definition. So we're going to start getting into that because we wanted to lay a foundation in the Great Commission and the mission of God. And we spent the largest part of the class, 6 weeks, talking about just disciple making in general. We talked about what it means to make disciples from the harvest, to mature disciples for mission, and then multiply disciples for God's glory. You just took a test on that this past week, and so you should be well equipped and knowledgeable in the area of disciple making. We discussed 2 books in that time frame: the Saturate book and the Gospel Centered Discipleship book, and so we have covered those as well. So we're going to take this last little third of the class to really dive in, and this is almost just like a precursor. It's not the final conversation we had about church planting, but we're going to kind of dive in, and really these next 3 weeks set us up for the next whole course. So if this is your only course you're taking in the church planting minor, then really you got a really good emphasis on the foundation for church planting as far as it relates to the Great Commission and disciple making. The second class, which is the method and strategy class, really jumps into a little bit more of a focused plan. So I gave you a little precursor tonight. Let's see, how do I?
Quick question.
Yes.
Hayes teaches that, right?
I teach it.
You teach that.
He teaches a class on international church planting.
What's
I
the
teach
next
one.
The one that you taught in the spring. Method.
Yeah, method and strategy. So the one I do is MI305. Method and strategy in North American church planting. So anything that says, I always have North American in the course title to separate from Mr. Hayes.
How much does it cost just to like edit a class, not edit audit?
To audit a class, it's like $100 or something. But I mean, like I always put my videos online for free. I mean, all these lectures, they're put onto my YouTube for free, and so you can always, and for you online, if you're interested, you can actually go back and look at the old stuff. I'm going to update about half the class. Because that was the class period where I actually invited in, I think, 22 different speakers over a semester. So I think I only did 3 class periods, and I had guests either Skype in, I did a pre-recorded session with, or they came physically to class if they were local people. So, and the reason is I had never planted a church. I've been a part of some things and had studied it academically, but had not actually been a lead planter. And so to really get a true perspective of what it takes, I brought in 22 who are part of it or have been part of church planting. And so a lot of those videos I'm still going to use because they're still really, really good, and the handle I'm going to update. Say what now?
You're gonna put them on your website?
I will eventually put them on my website, yes. My goal is
Share that with us before then.
my goal is to one day have them on my Christ and City website, yes. That Christ and City website is supposed to be a North American missiology resource site, and right now it's the Calgary church planting site for us. Then once we get up there, get a church established, it'll switch to a whole different idea. So that's why Christ and City doesn't really fit for Calgary, but it's the domain I own. So anyways, so yeah, if you want to be part of that class, you can take it for credit, take it as elective if you need it for other classes, but it is different from Mr. Hayes. Now, the foundation is a lot the same. He's talking about getting new churches started. We're talking about getting new churches started. He focuses on how to do that in international context. So where he talks a lot about engaging different kind of tribal mentalities, animism, a lot of those type of things in contextualization, we're talking about a kind of general North American framework. And so that's why the conversation is different. That's why we have different classes. So, but in the next class, kind of give you a little taste of it. These are the 5 phases that we actually discussed. So this is the outline of that particular class. We start with envisioning. And really tonight is kind of like stepping into envisioning, really, okay? So we're kind of starting here. The next course in the spring, we'll pick up with envisioning, talk about location, talk about community mapping, demographic studies, all those type of things, even into what is your vision for church planting. We talked about a vision for gospel saturation, so we tie that into how that bleeds into actually practically planting new churches. So tonight we're going to start with envisioning, but here are the phases. We go from envisioning to preparing, to launching, establishing, and then repeating that process. Okay? So when we talk about envisioning, discerning your call is kind of what we're doing tonight, talking about why do you want to plant a church. So where was I? All right, so envisioning, we're jumping into that tonight with calling. Envisioning looks into where, when, some of those other things, discerning, when to plant, how to be mentored, that sort of thing. Preparing really jumps into the nitty-gritty, getting a launch team established, an evangelism strategy, assessment. Assessment probably goes more into envisioning, but they kind of bleed. It's not clear-cut. You know me and my bleeding circles. This really should be that kind of diagram. This one will look cooler. So preparing is actually getting ready for a new church to start. So it's a lot about how you making disciples and multiplying. So taking the foundation of this class, putting it into a preparing phase, and also things of like how to find a meeting location. Are you going to have a logo for your church, and how are you going to choose a church name? We even talk about all those things. Then we talk about launching, how to actually get the church started. How do you have a kids ministry, a youth ministry, preaching, meeting location, all those type of things that go into getting it and actually getting something started. And we also talk about in the preparing what kind of church model are you choosing? Are you going to be a network of house churches? Are you going to shoot for having 400 people at a launch service? Or are you going to start with an in-home Bible study and hope that it grows? You're going to do missional communities. I mean, there's different models for church planting. So we talk about that in the envisioning preparing phase. But the launching, okay, so how are you going to get that started? What does that look like? Then establishing is getting your constitution, bylaws type things established. Establishing your leadership development system. Establishing if you're going to have like a deacon body or an elder board, or what are you going to do with lay workers and teams and different things. So you're kind of getting yourself established and becoming a church in order to set yourself up to repeat. This is when your church multiplies. So we talk about how do you multiply worship leaders, how do you multiply pastors, how do you multiply leaders of all levels. We talk about a leadership pipeline and different things. So and the repeat basically says, okay, your church has started, now envisioning you planting a church. So that's kind of how this all fits. If that makes sense. So that's a little taste of the next class that we'll be going into. But tonight, let's jump right into calling. So let's answer this question: who is called to church planting? What do you think?
Well, based on what Mr. Will Plitt has said, not all should plant, but all should be involved in church planting.
Did you just like pull that nugget of wisdom out of the air? I mean,
I heard the voice of the Holy Anointed One speak to me.
The voice of the Holy Anointed One. Interesting.
Dr. Hollander.
Dr. Hollander. All right.
How many
so,
was that?
have I mentioned in this class? I'm not sure if I have in this class or another. Because I think we talked about it early on. But one of the things that hit me was when I came to Piedmont, and I don't know if it's still like this as far as the culture of the school, but when I was here, it was very much a siloed environment to where there wasn't, now there's a little more crossover in ministry programs and you get along better, but like we almost hated the missions majors. They had it that, they were God's gift to this green earth, and I mean, now this is what we were thinking. It wasn't actually necessarily true. They're actually really good people.
Going here when you started this minor?
When I started as a student here, when I was 18, I started as a student. So I was in the youth ministry, so I only hung out with the youth ministry guys. And the pastoral guys, you're like, oh, you only want to study Greek and do sermons. That's so boring. We're going to plan cool events and lock-ins. And then the missions folks were always trying to guilt you into think, well, if you're not going to do this overseas in a place where you have to eat cockroaches, then you're not holy. We had all this, so everything's so siloed.
We don't have cliques like
Half of that was joking. Half of it was joking.
Minor don't get along with the missions minor.
Yeah, we don't get along with international church planting.
Yeah.
Global church planting is, no, I'm kidding. No, that is, we support all church planting. But,
That's balls.
anyways, the ministry was so siloed, so it's one of those where you feel called to the degree you're choosing. Okay, so like I would walk around and say pretty openly, I feel called to be a youth pastor. Is that a pretty common thing? I mean,
Yeah.
if we went around the room, you could say, I feel called to some type of ministry, whether it's church planting, pastoring, youth ministry, counseling, whatever it is, you say, I feel called to that. But here's what I realized, because it kind of messed me up for a couple of years. God never called me to be a youth pastor. He's not calling you into being a church planter, a pastor, a Christian school teacher, a senior pastor of a church, a children's ministry. He is not calling you to do that primarily. He's called you to make disciples of all nations. He may use you in one of those capacities in your role. Okay? So don't confuse calling with role. Okay? Now, because of simplicity of language, we can talk about, are you called to be a church planter? Well, yes. We can say there is a calling, but it's not your primary calling. It is a role that you may serve for a short period of time. It may be a role that you serve for the rest of your life. It may be something that you support someone who does. Just like what Will put, and he actually said this in the first class we did, not all should plant. It's a different kind of animal. Okay? It is not like when I became a youth pastor at Bethany Baptist Church 8 years ago. I stepped into an established ministry at a church that was over 50 years old, that had 30 teens, a youth room, and curriculum, and everything set up. Okay? It's not like that. Church planting is starting from scratch. Church planting is kind of the entrepreneurial side of pastoral ministry and missions. That's all it is. And like we said before, it's also an evangelism strategy. It's not the end all. So, who is called to church planting? Well, I'll say that everyone. Charles Spurgeon said it best. You're either a missionary or an imposter.
Okay.
Charles Spurgeon said that. You're either a missionary, every Christian is either a missionary or an imposter. Okay? Imagine that. Charles Spurgeon said something kind of good. So I would say, and I think we all can agree, biblically, we all should be involved in church planting. Why?
Well, because church planting is just a church multiplying itself, and we should all be involved in churches that are invested in replicating and multiplying themselves.
Right.
Ergo, we should all be involved in church planting.
So what is the end result, or what was the after effects of Matthew 28, 18 through 20? The Great Commission.
Church planting.
Churches were planted. The whole book of Acts. Churches were multiplied. Everywhere you see disciples being made, they're gathering in homes. And they're gathering in the temple, and they're learning. Acts 2, 42 through 48, and Acts 4. They're gathering, they're getting together. So churches were being formed. Also in Paul's missionary journeys, which outlines the book of Acts, he goes to city, getting new churches started through making disciples and raising up and developing leaders. And churches were formed. So it's the end product. It's the byproduct of Great Commission living and disciple making. That's why we focus this class on disciple making first. Then we start talking about church planting. So if you get the cart before the horse, you're not going to get anywhere. We are all called to be a part of church planting, I think, as an evangelism strategy. I think every believer should take a part, but not every person is called to fulfill the role of a church planter. Okay, I believe, and we're going to talk about this in the upcoming weeks. We're going to talk tonight a little bit about how do you know if you're called or not. Okay, so just a good question to start with. We're going to talk about biblical qualifications, and we're going to go to the qualifications for elders, because a church planter becomes a pastor. All right, you're pastoring pastors. All right, so we're going to talk about the biblical qualifications for church planters, which is basically pastors. We're going to talk about wiring, what are kind of strengths and skills, strength finders type thing, disc profiles, Myers-Briggs, even some of those things and how they relate. And I'll show you my own personal. So I'm going to go through my assessment documents that I went through for the mission board to kind of give you an example. So anyways, I would say that everyone is called to be involved, but not everyone is called to be a church planter. And we're also going to talk about different kinds of church planters. All right. So let's progress forward. So let me give you a little bit of my story. So this is a copy of the prayer card that everyone in here on campus got a copy of. For those of you online, I can send you a link to download, or you can just copy and paste this picture. If you want to put my my cute kid on your refrigerator.
We have two on our refrigerator.
Wow,
My roommate's
I feel extra special.
My
All right, so I just shared a little bit about how I wasn't sure, well, I didn't understand my calling. My calling was to make disciples. My role was to do it as a youth pastor. Well, then I leave that job, ministry position. I come to work at Piedmont. So did my calling never change? No, my calling never changed. I was still called to make disciples and be a part of that effort, but my role changed. I then became an employee of Piedmont, helping churches through E412 disciple their people for mission, and also getting to hang out with a handful of students who were coming in my office, like, everyone but Brad. You and I are just now getting to know each other, but these two guys spent some time in my office. One more than the other, Kyle. But
I struggled my first couple of years here.
Kyle came in often. We had a good chat, but you never brought me gifts. Oh, yeah, you did. You brought me a Batman poster.
That's right.
Yeah.
No, mask.
Math, that's right. So anyways, so let me kind of share with you a little bit of my story. I had to actually go through this during my assessment retreat with the North American Mission Board. And so how did I get to where I was as an undergrad coming to Piedmont, going into youth ministry, to where now I've got a missions prayer card and I am church planter to Calgary, Alberta, Canada. How did that happen? Well, a lot of it had to do with my calling and understanding how God was wiring me. So I come to Piedmont for my undergrad, wanting to study youth ministry, primarily because my wife and I, we actually kind of semi-grew up together. My dad became her youth pastor when I was 12 and she was 13. So all the awkward middle school and my prideful high school years she was there for. That's why she didn't even bother to date me, like me, nothing. Then I started to mature a little bit, got towards college. We started dating in college. But I wanted to be youth pastor because all other of my friends in youth ministry were leaving the youth group as soon as they turned 16. They get their license and they're checking out. So Jill and I were actually the only two seniors graduating from our youth group together when there were like a good 10 or 11 others who should have been there with us. But we were the last two. So my heart was kind of being broken for my generation. I said, well, maybe I can go be a youth pastor and help stop, everyone from, graduating the church whenever they got into high school or whatever. So that kind of got me into thinking about Bible college. That's actually what got me here. I wanted to be able to study youth ministry. I liked the idea of being on a soccer team, which playing here on a small campus was a little bit easier to do than going to a larger school. I'm not that good. And I had a lot of buddies who were already here and some who were coming from my Christian school. And so it seemed like a good fit. And so I came here to Piedmont to study youth ministry. Well, I think it was my first or second year we had a missions conference. And we bring in different mission agencies. And one was sharing about starting new churches, church planting in North America. Now, I don't know if I've made this silly statement, but I've said it before in other places. In my hometown where I grew up, in a small rural North Carolina town, if a new church got started, the question you asked was, well, which one split? Because that was how new churches were getting started. You didn't have strategic church planting happening. I was never familiar. My dad was a pastor, and I was never familiar with the idea. And so I get to Piedmont, I start hearing, like, wait a second, we have plenty of churches everywhere. Why in the world would we need to start? I literally, in my backyard, I could see one steeple, and I could walk to 3 other churches. So why do we need to plant more here in North America, here in the U.S.? Well, then the mission agency guy who was speaking started sharing how there are pockets and places here in the States that didn't have the percentage of churches that we have here in the Southeast. And we covered that in one of the first lectures. We talked about the different percentages and stuff. So I'm not going to go back over that. That was the first time that actually hit me that church planting was a thing. I mean, I grew up as a pastor's kid and never even heard the concept. I only understood church planting as you're a missionary overseas in a village in Africa. That was it. That was my very small minuscule idea of missions. Okay, so I get here and I start hearing this concept of church planting here. I'm like, well, that sounds kind of cool. So I started looking up church planting here in the area, and then in the U.S. And you start getting in touch with these kind of celebrity guys who are rising on the scene. So who was one of them? Mark Driscoll. And so I started following everything that Mars Hill was doing. Now this is in 2005 and 6, when he was still cussing strong from the pulpit, and he was, talking about already brewing his own beer and doing those kind of controversial things. But if you jumped into the broader conversation, so many were jumping on. Then Acts 29 gets started. Oh, this is the church planting network and different things. I'm not slamming any of those guys or the groups, but when I was kind of new to the concept, it was new to the rest of the country at that time. So this is 10 years ago. So we've had 10 years of seeing how that has developed. And out of those pastors I started following, and I see, so there were probably 5 main, I'm not going to name them all, 5 main kind of church planters who I was at least checking their sermons, podcasts, books, whatever, blogs, all that kind of stuff. 3 out of those 5 are no longer in ministry or failed somewhere in ministry. Mark Driscoll was one of them, and he is now restarted. He started another church in Scottsdale, Arizona. But 3 of the 5, that's big. The majority, 3 of the 5 that I was paying attention to and learning from have all failed in some way. And hopefully are getting restoration or have been restored. But my concept and my idea was, man, I got to do it like them. So my calling, and for church planting, or what I thought was my calling, started with, man, all these other churches are bad. They're boring. The music is lame. The ministries aren't affecting. Lost people are not coming to Christ. The teenagers are leaving the youth ministries. I'm going to go back to my hometown, and I'm going to start the cool church that everyone will want to come to. All the disgruntled people who aren't getting fed at their church, they're going to flock to my renovated warehouse. The smoke machine is going to be, we're going to have 2 of them from both sides of the stage. That way, when I come out to exegete scripture, I'm going to be rock and rolling with the purple light shining down on me. That literally was my idea of what it meant to be a church planter. Sorry, what was that? Is that something that should not be on video? He just slammed somebody?
Yeah.
So,
No,
anyways.
just the whole congregation. It's fine.
So here was Dustin the other 2.5 years of my undergrad.
Okay.
I was going around to my buddies saying, hey, come start a church with me. We're going to do it right. And then they were like, okay, well, how are you going to do that? We're going to start a cool church. So I designed PowerPoints with names. I haven't brought my notebook, have I? I need to do that. I'll try to remember that next time. I was thinking of church names and cool things, all this kind of stuff. I was just watching what these other places are doing and trying to make them even cooler. They were all lame. And I couldn't get a single person to agree to do that with me after I got out of undergrad. And I was telling Jill, who we were dating and then engaged in college, and she's like, sure, okay. Like, she was she thought it was a phase, like, he's going to get over it and come back to real life, all right? Now, my problem was I did not fully understand church planting. I didn't understand the concept. I didn't understand what I know today. So I say that I started off with a very bad idea of church planting, but God has redeemed my really poor thinking. And so I got graduated here, got into a youth ministry position, which really showed me a little bit more about disciple making. Left there really feeling called to plant among lost people. God was bringing a lot of lost friends to my wife and I, and so we started spending more time with lost people than the students in the youth ministry. And so I told my pastor, I'm like, I'm not doing you guys a service. I'm spending more time outside the church than in it, and you guys are paying me. And the ones I'm hanging out with are not going to come walking through the door. We invited them. We tried. They'd come to our home. We could go to them. I could hang out in the bars with them, but they would not. Did I say that on camera? Yes, I went to some of their bar shows and some of their music stuff. Drank a Sprite and played darts, okay? So yeah, I went to where the lost people were and found out that that's what evangelism and church planting is about, is finding lost people and discipling them. So I left the youth ministry position without a job lined up, got a job at Starbucks. That taught me how to evangelize in a post-Christian context. When 75% of my fellow employees and coworkers were gay, lesbian, transgender, and only two others were Christians. And so you got a dozen I'm working with, and only two others were Christians, and I'm usually not working with them. All right, so it taught me how to do evangelism when your gay friend comes up and asks you about dating advice. Okay, how do I biblically do that? To maintain a friendship, but also help them. So anyways, so God was preparing our hearts. He was doing some training. Started working here at Piedmont. So I started doing a church planting residency because I needed to be a part of a church that was actively planting churches. Okay, so I wanted to share a little bit of my story because I never saw any of that coming. I had this really crazy idea about we just need a cool church to where no, this is a strategy for saturating communities and cities with the gospel. And I think it is a biblical concept. And so as I got into seminary and different things started shaping my thinking of the Great Commission, so I started thinking disciple making first with the outcome of church planting, not vice versa. So now we're heading to Calvary, and I've shared a little bit about that story as well. In the last year, we've been talking with Calvary, made 6 trips, a lot of the discernment process, really understanding. So am I called to church planting, and am I being called to Calvary? And so what were those affirmations that led that way? And we had a lot of things along the way that did kind of confirm for us this where we should be. So let's talk a little bit about what does a church planter look like. And so in your textbook reading from Stetzer, basically you want to see a lot of similar concepts and ideas. And actually, I put some of his thoughts on the slides to kind of review. But I just shared with you kind of what I thought a church planter looked like. They have a really cool faux hawk. Their jeans are worth at least $200. And they're tight, and
their shirts are plaid but shiny.
Plaid but shiny shirts, yes.
And they're always tan.
And they're always tan. Yes. So what does a church planter? Now we're not talking about physical appearance here. That's what we just jokingly talked about. Because I started meeting people who did not fit that bill at all. So you meet anyone who doesn't look like some of the stereotypical things. So let's talk about what a church planter looks like. So this is kind of outlining what Stetzer has in his chapter. I think I put the page numbers there below. Yeah, Planting Missional Churches, pages 47 through 49. So you guys already read this for class, so I'm not going to just read through what he said. But let's just kind of go through discussing this. First of all, what does a church planter look like, or how do you know you are one, or maybe you're qualified for one, or qualified to be one? Do you have a pattern of ministry initiation? Are you entrepreneurial when it comes to church work? Okay. So one of the cool things, I've got to talk to a lot of really neat business leaders in my internship at Calvary as we're preparing, and a lot of them were entrepreneurs, starting their own companies, or innovating the ones that they were with, or reinventing things or whatever. But when you're thinking of the role of church planting and being a church planter, now remember, we say everyone can be involved, but this is kind of fine-tuning down to, okay, are you the one who's actually doing that work? All right, so that's where we're kind of jumping into that tonight. Do you have a pattern of ministry initiation? I started developing this when I was an undergrad here at Piedmont. I helped start 2 ministries that I had a lot of fun with and was seen as like the director of those 2. One was a thing that we called Overflow, which was an on-campus worship service. We actually had it kicked out of the chapel because we had drums and a guitar, and I'm not lying. And now we have a full praise band. Chad and I actually started together. It was a dream that we had in his dorm room one night, and the first night we had 70 come to a worship event over in the chapel, and only half were Piedmont students. The other half were friends invited, a lot of them weren't saved. It was a really cool thing. But Piedmont and some of the supporters and churches weren't quite ready for us to have a very modern type anything happening in 2007, I think it was. Maybe it was 2007 or 8. They weren't quite ready for it. And so now it's funny that you guys are even more contemporary than what we were in a normal chapel. But I helped get that started and loved it. We planned it. We helped design the logo stuff for it. I spoke the first night and kind of gave why we're calling this Overflow. And we were talking about having a love that's overflowing into our community and to others. It was really an evangelism type of thing. But we saw a need on campus that wasn't being met with students, and so we tried to meet that need. The second thing was called Youth Group Takeover. And so I was a youth ministry major. I was a president of, it's called Network 412 at that point, the Youth Leader Fellowship. And we basically designed a team that would go to a church youth group and take it over for the night. So we would do everything, the speaking, the games, the music, everything. And it promoted Piedmont, helped recruitment, so admissions was sending some stuff with us. But it also gave us practice. We were speaking and learning and engaging with youth groups of all different sizes. And I spoke at the first one for that because I helped get it started. So I just had this desire to help start these things. I was doing them mostly in youth ministry on campus. Well, I get into youth ministry at Bethany. I still want to start things. All right, so it doesn't mean that you have to always be about starting things, because sometimes I will start things and not be able to finish them. That's another bane of this. But do you have a pattern of ministry initiation? Do you take the initiative to either get something started or to take over something that needs some work and help? The next one, the second one that steps through the list and explains a pattern of ministry multiplication. Do you know how to multiply yourself out through other leaders? Do you know how to have, so one thing for our youth group takeover team, we didn't get there because I graduated right after it got started, but how can we have 3 teams going out instead of 1? That was some things that we were dreaming of and trying to get started. In my youth group, I wanted to multiply the small groups that we were leading, so I had to multiply leaders. So I had to raise up 5 high school leaders to start leading new small groups, because I couldn't lead 7 small groups. But I developed other high school leaders who were doing it and developing that. So do you have a pattern of ministry multiplication? Do you know what that looks like, and is that built into your DNA? The next one that he mentions is personal wiring. All right, so we're going to get into this here in a little more deeply, and we'll talk about it more when we get into the qualifications and capabilities, and even the character of it. So save that for a little bit later. But kind of person, are you wired? Being a church member, you're a different kind of animal. You're not normal. I've had to come to grips that I am socially awkward. What I was actually thinking of these. This is how awkward I am. I was thinking of these. If I met a stranger, how would I introduce myself? I am socially awkward. And there's something else about being kind of nerdy.
Well, I was going to say.
So anyways, I can't remember. But are you wired to be a church planter? Not everyone is. And those who aren't wired to do it, doesn't mean they shouldn't be in ministry, just they shouldn't be a lead church planter. That's all that means. It doesn't mean they need to not be involved in church planting. A holy dissatisfaction. So this is what I mistranslated in my undergrad days. I thought because all churches were boring and still did just hymns on a piano and organ, that they need to be done away with, and the cool new Dustin-style church needs to take over the world. That was a very unholy, selfish, prideful Dustin faction.
Holy dissatisfaction.
Holy dissatisfaction is what I was feeling when I was a youth pastor, saying, I've got a lot more lost friends, and I need to spend more time with them than in the walls of a church. I loved my church. I loved being there. The youth group was great. Pastor was awesome. Good support, everything. And actually a decent paycheck for a part-time youth ministry position. But I was just dissatisfied, because I was getting texts on a Wednesday night from my lost buddies wanting to go play basketball at Winston State. But I had a youth group. Not had to, I got to. But you see, so there was this holy dissatisfaction and stuff about the numbers in your community. Lack of gospel-centered churches. Friends you know who don't know Christ and don't have a place to call church home for whatever reason. So that's that kind of holy dissatisfaction, not an arrogant, prideful, well, I can do it better, which was what I started with. Family commitment. It took years for my wife to understand church planting and her calling for it. When I first tried, she laughed at me in college and thought it was a phase. But then once we got into youth ministry, she started saying, okay, you need to stop talking about it. We'll just go do it. But she didn't really understand. It actually took her several years of me better explaining it and not just saying, because her first thought was what she first heard from Dustin, cool stage, smoke screen, everything else. I said, no, it's not. I'm learning. It's not like that. So we started discussing more of our family planting the gospel as we plan our lives, not just getting a new cool church started. So, but is your family committed to being part? Because when God calls you, He's calling your family. He called both Jill and Kirk to Calvary, not just Dustin. Now, I know you guys are married yet, but some of you online may be. You already understand this commitment for family and ministry. But Kyle, I mean, you and Ashley are engaged. You're talking about this now. You're talking about, do we have a family commitment? And it was one of those affirmations for Jill and I that both my parents and her parents affirmed us going to Canada. For taking the only grandchild on both sides 2,600 miles away. My father-in-law sat in his pickup truck. This was back in last spring when we were still trying to pray through and discern. And he said, I'd rather you be in Calgary in the middle of God's will than in North Carolina and out of it. even though that meant we go from 2 hours away to a 12-hour plane trip and $500 away.
12-hour plane?
12 hours of travel, 8 on a plane, but about 12 traveling
Okay, I was
total.
about to say.
We add all the airplane. Yeah.
Flying.
So it's a day. Yeah, you take a whole day to get there. It's not that bad. But we had a full family commitment. Even down to grandparents are really excited. Other things that I was talking about church planning before, there was no excitement. There was only fear and warnings. But when this came up, it seemed right and God was blessing it. So family commitment. Then lastly, church affirmation. If your local church, if you go up to us and say, hey, pastor, I'm going to go plant a church. And pastor's like, we need to talk. It may be that church planting as a evangelism strategy is not your role. Maybe you support, maybe you be part of a church planting team, and maybe you do another ministry as part of a church planting. But being that lead planter may not be your calling and your role. But if your church says, you know what, we think you've got this, we affirm it and want to help you get there, that's saying a lot, because churches plant churches. So let's go and talk a little bit about assessment right now. Do know these for test type purposes. Basically anything on these slides will be. But I want to kind of go through this fairly quickly because we're going to mine into it in the next 2 weeks. We're going to go deeper into a lot of these concepts. There's a really important thing in church planting, and really it needs to be in every ministry. It's talked more about in anything missions related, because like right now we're raising support from other churches. So do they trust that they're going to start giving $100 a month to someone who's going to go and be on vacation in Calgary? Right? So we went through an assessment process where we answered a bunch of questionnaires and interviews, all type of things with a mind to theology, family dynamics. Do I even know what church planting is? What is my vision for it? Strategy, all these type of things. You're being assessed or really vetted to see, are you actually capable? And we went through an assessment in 2 different ways. Through my local church, 121, they assessed me before a church planting residency program that I started 2 years before I even started the whole Calgary conversation. Then we were assessed by the mission board. So I was assessed by a local church and by the mission board and got affirmations from both that, yes, you're called into planting. And so in your assessment, we're really kind of mining into, and Stetzer in your book talks about the Ridley assessment questions. So you'll see a lot of these are the same on here. This is just a little bit condensed version of the same stuff. This is one that Will Plitt shared in the class last time. A clear sense of calling. We just talked about that. Do you know that you are being called? Spiritual and emotional health. This is a big one because as we were talking in our missions team meeting today at the church, our Hispanic pastor was talking about when he was in Cuba, when they were going to a new village, a new area that did not have a gospel presence, they spent a month praying against the demonic warfare there because they were dealing with demons in Cuba. Dealing with. Now we don't think we're dealing with demons and spiritual warfare, but we are. We're just labeling it a bunch of other things, or we're just ignoring it. But whenever you get to a mission context and the devil knows what you're there to do, he's going to try to stop you. And at the end of the day, when you're involved in a church plan in whatever capacity, and your spouse is upset with you, the other church leaders are mad at you for a decision you just made, the person that you were discipling and thinking that had a lot of potential has let you down and fallen back into gross sin, when a third of your support money is not coming in as it should, and you don't know how to pay rent for the next month, but you live in another country, when those things hit you, at the end of that day, the only thing you'll have left is the affirmation and your calling. It's the only thing you have left. Did God call me to this? When it's tough, do I know that I'm called, and do I know that God and His Spirit are going to get me through this? At the end of the day, that's all you're going to have. So, to be spiritually and emotionally healthy before you get there is key. Doesn't mean you have arrived and you're a super Christian. No, none of us are. But are you in a good state spiritually and emotionally? This is why I think, I don't like to put age limits on things, but I started thinking about church planting when I was about 19. I'm now 29 before I'm actually doing it. Now, I think there are some 19, 20-year-olds who should be involved in church planting.
10 more?
Because I don't think I needed 10 years. Dustin did. Doesn't mean you guys need to, but it was 10 years of spiritually and emotional health and preparation for me before the affirmation started coming. So even 2, 3, and 4 years ago when I started looking into different things and, I'm going to Boston and plant a church, or I'm going to do something in Winston or my hometown or whatever, They were all filling through, no affirmation from anywhere, and everyone around me was saying, no, you're not ready. But God called me to church planting, yes, but not right now. He called me to be a part of church planting, to support it, and to learn it. So that's what I did. So, spiritual and emotional health. I'm actually meeting with a counselor on a regular basis right now to make sure that I am good emotionally before I take my family, because I have a lot of fears and a lot of worries. So I'm meeting with a professional Christian counselor right now to help me understand some of this stuff. I'm not falling apart. I'm not questioning anything, but he's helping me work through some stuff. Christ-centeredness. Are you focusing everything on the gospel or on yourself? Is your worship service, your small groups, whatever it looks like, is going to be focused on worshiping and glorifying Christ, or making you into a celebrity so you can get a book deal? I'll tell you, the latter was a big thing 10 years ago. Character and holiness. Sanctification. We're going to talk about character in the next lecture, the one after that. But are you actually growing in holiness? We talk a lot about grace, but not near enough about holiness. That's not a slam against some of the more reform-leaning who may be in this class, but I've heard many who say reform guys only lean on grace. That's not always true, but you have to balance grace with holiness. Are you actually pursuing Christ's likeness? Leadership abilities. You'll be assessed. I was assessed on have I actually developed leaders for something. I was interviewed, had to do a big questionnaire. How did you identify the leader? How did you train them? How did you keep up with them? How did you get them ready? All these type of things. Did I actually exhibit my own leadership ability, and could I replicate that? Strong family life. Doesn't mean your family's perfect and without issues and without brokenness, but is your family strong and healthy? We went through a big marriage survey that really mined into. Now, the marriage survey on paper said my wife and I are still compatible, so that's a good thing. If you get that you're not compatible, your premarital counseling, you might want to get a refund. But do you have a strong family life? It was not until my wife was saying, I think it's time for us to start exploring church planting and praying more specifically about it, that God opened the door for Calvary. It was when we started praying together, we were owning that together. Disciple-making skills. Do you know how to evangelize, share the gospel, and to lead someone through a discipleship pathway from lost to leading? So we've already talked about how to do that in this class. Hopefully you can implement that. Your big project for this class is doing that. Okay. Relationship building. Can you build a relationship with strangers? Because church planting is about building relationships with strangers. You move to a community, they don't know the gospel, you got to walk in and say, hey, I'm not a nut, but yes, I believe a heaven and hell exist. I believe Satan is real. I believe you need Jesus. How do you build a relationship with someone and be able to have this kind of conversation? So are you good at building relationships? Are you, do people run away from you when you come into a room, or are they okay with talking with you? A missional lifestyle is sharing the gospel and taking care of people in their needs, sharing and showing the gospel part of your everyday life. Flexibility and adaptability. I have yet to find a church planter that has said every plan that we laid out for this new church plant went without a glitch. Usually it's from day one, something was happening, we had to retool. But are you flexible and will you adapt to that? And we're almost done. Let's look at these last 10. Some pre-assessment questions. This will help you think through for your own self. Are you called to be a church planter, or are you called to be involved in a church that is church planting? Remember, everyone should be involved, but not everyone is called to actually be a planter. Here's some good questions with some good scripture follow-up. I want to go through these quickly. Am I called to plant a church at this time and in this place? That was part of my big question, was at this time. Remember, it's 10 years for me almost. And in this place, we bought a condo at the back door of Wake Forest University because I really thought I was calling myself to plant a church at Wake Forest University on campus. So we bought a condo there. It made sense, right? Moved to the mission field. Then God calls us to move to Calvary. So we had some good ministry at Wake Forest, but it wasn't what we thought. But am I called to plant a church at this time? It may be a few years from now. Like me, I needed 10 years. Do I have 100% support from my spouse and my family? Doesn't mean that my wife doesn't have some doubts and some fears. Doesn't mean there's things that we have to discuss and figure out. But when a doubt comes up, we say, okay, here's how our work-life balance will be. Here's how I want you involved in ministry. Yes, Kyle?
How does that play out when maybe certain family members aren't faithful Christians?
When certain family members aren't faithful Christians? Are you talking about like
in-laws, parents?
In-laws, parents.
Like that.
Yeah, well, I would say that God's calling trumps our parents' preferences.
Yeah.
As adults, you're no longer under your parents' house. Doesn't mean you just ignore their. I mean, I talked to both my mom and dad and my in-laws a lot about Calvary. We even took them up there to help us think through and pray for it. Okay, so we talked a lot because I trusted their judgment. I talked to aunts and uncles who have been in ministry and different things. But if you have a family member who is lost and not supporting, then that's a good witnessing opportunity to share and say, well, God has called us. I'm sorry you're upset that we're leaving, but God has called us to move to this city, 1,000 miles away, or to move across town, whatever it is, and maybe give you a platform to share. But they do not determine where you go. God does. And so when God affirmed for us where we're going and when, the family support was unanimous from everybody. And not all my family members are Christians. My brother, who is not, he's like, I don't get it, but whatever. I'll come visit you. For my brother, that's a lot. That's saying a lot. He is very as atheist as you can get, but for him, that was a lot. Third, am I biblically qualified to plant a church? We're going to talk about biblical qualifications here in another lecture. But if you're not at least pursuing the ideals of 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1 for a pastor elder, then I would say that probably need to work on those before you step into a church planting role, because it is pastoring. Number 4, am I healthy enough to plant a church physically? All right. If you've got, if you're battling some type of major disease or cancer that wears you out and you can only function and do things a couple of hours a day or whatever, this is not your role. Be a part of a church and be involved in some way, but church planting is long days. It's, waking up at night when you've got, people calling and texting that they are suicidal or they're, just got kicked out of their house, whatever it is. They're going to go to the pastor because they're trusting you, okay? Physically, emotionally, we talked about that already. Financially, are you in some crazy debt? We're in some school debt right now, and the only reason, there's another reason for the 10-year gap. We've been working to pay down our school debt to where it's a little more manageable for us to be able to move. But 4 or 5 years ago, it would have crippled us if we tried to move with our undergrad debt. So stay debt-free as best you can. Spiritually, are you spiritually healthy? Are you soaking in the Word? Are you praying? Are you meditating, memorizing on Scripture? Are you part of a church right now? It always bothered me when I would meet students here at Piedmont who were talking about going into ministry, but were so marginally involved and didn't even want to be involved in the church on Sunday morning, didn't want to do anything. But they were coming here to be a pastor. Does not make sense at all. Okay. Maritally, is your marriage healthy enough for church plant? 5th, am I called to be the lead planter or to serve in another capacity?
Sorry.
Are you called to be the lead planter or to serve in another capacity? For a year and a half, I got to serve in another capacity of a church plant. I loved it. I helped Revo Church start their second church on the north side of town. Had a blast with it, learned a lot. But I was still involved in it, but in a different capacity. No pay. I was a small group leader and helped with parking and door greeting on Sunday morning. That was my role. So I got to serve on the launch team.
You greeted the door on my first Sunday that.
Yeah, people stopped coming when I started greeting. They moved me to something in the back, and it was dark. Running
the soundboard.
Yeah.
That
was a Kyle slam. Number 6, do I have a clear vision for this new work? Remember, we said our vision needs to be gospel saturation, right? Every person, every place. Is your vision like that, or is your vision smokescreen, tight jeans, epic expositional preaching from the ESV only? All right. Am I a hard worker? Am I persevering? Study these scriptures. Paul, notice that he writes to Timothy about working hard, being diligent to preach. A worker is worthy of his wages. Don't let him despise your youth. Work hard to show yourself. Different thing. I'm merging verses there, but you get the idea. Are you a hard worker? Are you willing to put in long hours? Because that's what's going to take to plant church. Will you persevere when it gets tough? That first big instance, in 3 months into it, are you going to run away? Are you going to persevere? Number 8, am I adaptable to new people, places, and concepts? If you're wondering about that, take the contextualization class that I do, the MI305-FA18, I think it is. It's called Contextualization North American Mission. How do you adapt to a new people, a new place, and a new concept? So I'm moving to somewhere that has McDonald's and Starbucks and Walmarts, and they drive Ford pickup trucks, and they speak English. Missional Helix, there you go. We're going to learn that.
Oh, my Lord.
But I need to learn what life in Calgary looks like. Just like you may need to learn what life in New York City looks like. or life in Winston-Salem, wherever God calls you. Okay.
Is that class available to just come and sit in?
Yeah.
Okay.
All the videos are online as well. Number 9, can I raise the funds needed for my family's needs? I had no clue how tough yet fun fundraising was going to be. So for us to go to Calgary, we have to raise over $100,000 a year for living and ministry expenses. It's an expensive city to live in. Rent is about $2,500 a month for a 3-bedroom house. Crazy.
Oh.
That's cheap. Houses start at $500,000 for what we get for $120,000.
I didn't know you were moving to Beverly Hills.
It's not, trust me, but it's an affluent city, and
Where's
so to
everybody
go
in
there.
Canada?
That's why it's so expensive.
So, anyways, I have to raise funds from here because of the visa that we have. All right, I have to raise $108,000 a year in order to do what God has called us to do there, and we are 80% there.
Oh yeah.
80 in 4 months. I was scared to death. Didn't think, but I start having conversations and I start talking to business executives. Talk to the VP of fundraising for Wake Forest Baptist Health.
Wow.
He's in charge of getting big donors from all over the world to donate to the hospital for their research and stuff. Millions upon millions of dollars this guy's helping, and so he's given me several days of sitting down and talking with me and helping me understand fundraising. What things to say. Dr. Pettit here at Piedmont, that's one of his big roles is to help raise funds. He's helped me big time. So, can you raise the funds needed for my family's needs? Yes. Question.
This is half joking, half serious. Does that budget include your Netflix and Hulu accounts?
Yes.
Because that's something I've always wondered about.
Yeah.
When you're raising your own money, I mean, how much of that? You know, obviously you cut some amenities out, but how much do you keep?
Yeah. So we've always had a frugal lifestyle. So here's the good thing: a lot of our partners have known us for years. And that's another thing that when we talk next class about fundraising, we have a whole class on that. We're going to talk about don't burn bridges.
Okay.
People who you may have, thought, oh, I'll never, this just happened to where someone I thought I would not be doing any ministry with, he was an interim pastor with me. He resigned and did something else. I'm like, I'll never, be around this guy again. Now he's in a role, and the group that he leads, it's an association denomination group, are now financially supporting us, and they're our second largest giver. And I thought I would never really have anything to do with the guy again. I thought we'd be moving to different places, and oh well, I know for a while it was cool, but he came back, so I'm glad I didn't, in my arrogant days, burn that bridge. But anyways, can you raise funds needed for my family's needs? You asked about, here's where I wanted to go. A lot of people who were fundraising with know me personally and knew that we didn't have an extravagant lifestyle, and so we don't have cable at our house. We haven't for over 2 years. We only have Netflix. If it's not free on the ABC or CBS app on my phone or Apple TV, we don't watch it. We don't have time for TV. We just have the internet. But so it'll include all our living expenses. What does it take to live in Calgary? To have heat, have electricity, and yes, have some little date night money. When you go into a mission field setting or something, it doesn't mean that you have to get rid of every single article of clothing unless that's what your context demands. Which nakedness is not usually normal, but anyways, you see what I'm saying. 10 and last, am I humble enough to learn from others?
What? Say?
Am I humble enough to learn from others? I'm moving to Calgary. I do not know what church and life feels like in Calgary. So I'm spending a year as an apprentice to learn under an existing pastor who was born and raised there. And his job for a year is to help me understand the culture, understand what leadership in a Canadian church looks and feels like. But am I humble enough to learn from him and not say, no, I have all my ideas already. I've made the PowerPoints. I hope they work. All right. Particularly from those who have gone ahead of me in different areas. So one of the things that I did in my envisioning time discerning, I did Skype calls with the church planters in Calgary, some in Toronto, one in near Philadelphia. He's actually in Harrisburg, close to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. A guy from Orlando, several from here, a friend of mine from the Summit Church. And where's that other guy from? Somewhere out west. Somewhere in California, I can't remember. But anyways, he was a random guy I got connected with. But so I Skype called all these guys. Oh, Chicago too. And just help me process this. Help me understand these things. You've done it before. You've helped lead things. Help me understand. So, do I have another slide? I don't even know. All right, let's close on this. 6 areas of focus when discerning the call. All right, am I called to be a lead guy, some other kind of role? Prayer. I would say that definitely has to be number 1. Are you praying about it? God, give me a clear sense of what you want me to do, when you want me to do it, how you want me to do it. Passion. Do you have a passion for church planting that extends beyond just reading about it in a book and getting excited? That was me. I read about it, got excited, but didn't have a clue how to do it. But I have to have a passion for it. People. Do you just love people? That's ministry. Provision. Are you trusting God for your provision? Remember Luke 10? Don't take anything with you. All right? Will you trust God for your provision? Place. Where's God calling me to? For a long time, I thought God was taking us to Boston. But what we quickly realized was that Dustin was trying to get us to Boston. That was not our place. And peace. Do we have a peace from God during the assessment process, during conversations with others, different things? Do we have a peace from God that this is right? And Jill and I unanimously have agreed for the last several months that yes, Calgary is right. It just feels right. We have a solid peace about it. And one of the affirmations is we have 80% of our funding raised in 4 months. That's crazy awesome. Not anything I'm doing, it's complete God providing. Literally, I just got an email probably an hour before I came to class that we had gotten another donation, another ministry partner, an individual. She was my former English teacher. She doesn't make a lot of money. Her husband left her for another woman years ago. She lives by her 90-something-year-old mother lives with her, so she takes care of her. She's involved in a local church, and she actually taught me in kindergarten through 12th grade in my Christian school. Love the lady to death, but she doesn't have money. She doesn't come from money. She doesn't get that. But I got an email today. She was not one that I was going to pester and bother about supporting us, other than, hey, can you pray for us kind of thing. And she's giving us $50 a month. Out of nowhere. Another story. About a month ago, I got a Facebook message from a girl who I used to be in youth group with. She's about 3 years younger than I was, but we were in youth group together, and she went to my school, and her husband now, they've been married a little over a year. Her husband also went to the same Christian school, so I've known them for years. We weren't that close, 3 years different in high school. You don't really do a lot when you're a senior with a ninth grade or whatever. But she was really nice when youth group together and whatnot. Didn't really keep up with them all that much. My dad performed their wedding last summer, a year ago, and got a random Facebook message, said, hey, what's your address? We want to send you a card. We know you're moving for ministry soon. We just want to send you a card. I said, okay, great. Here's our address. Would love to hear how you're doing. I thought really it was just going to be like a, hey, we're praying for you card. A card came in the mail with a $5,000 check. He's a butcher at Save-A-Lot. And she is a hostess at a restaurant in the Pines. I don't know where I actually asked them, is this like, jokingly, but like, how'd you get a hold of this money? This is crazy. I don't have $5,000 to give anybody. I'd have to sell a lot. I said, who sold a kidney? And the guy's like, I'm feeling a little light on this side. But it's just not. So I'm sharing that to say, God has affirmed and given us a peace through all these really cool. It's like a weekly story of God's provision and grace, of just making sure that we get there. So, anyways, I think I went too long tonight for the lecture, but I hope that was helpful. And it's good for understanding calling. So.